Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar. The topic for today is your China sales program. Before I begin, I would just like to let you know that if you do have any questions during the presentation, you can type them in to the chat section on the webinar panel. If I haven't answered your questions during the presentation, then please do send me an email and I'd be more than happy to respond to you. Before beginning, I would like to briefly introduce Clayco Group to you. Clayco Group is an international management consulting firm with over 120 consultants, accountants, and legal professionals based throughout our 10 offices in China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. We assist companies, foreign companies, in entering the China market, everything from strategy development, incorporations, and all outsourcing solutions thereafter. We can advise on pre-investments into China, so whether you are trading or consulting on the market, as well as incorporating and recruitment services. Now, I would like to start off the presentation by giving you all the options available when offering sales programs on the China market. The first three options are in relation to outsourcing. The first one is sales with no representation. A foreign company has the option of establishing a network and identifying potential buyers or even partners by visiting or exhibiting at relevant trade fairs in China. Selling into China without any local presence is naturally the first step for many. But if a company really wishes to expand and really attack the potential in the market, then a local presence is really unavoidable. Naturally, before entering into any business relationship with a potential Chinese distributor or agent, a due diligence is an important factor that needs to occur. A thorough background check, especially in terms of the financial side, must occur. The second option follows from the first without having a representation to finding a distributor or finding an agent on the ground. Now, the greatest challenge that foreign suppliers face is really to find dedicated, reliable, professional, and credit-worthy distributors. A long-term, focused, and consistent strategy is needed to access and profit in the market. Now, you have to imagine that in China, many of these distributors and agents generally have an edge over all foreign players for the fact that they already have the guanxi, which means relationships, and the network in China. Additionally, they offer highly price competitive services. However, they may not be exactly what you're looking for. And as I said from point one, you should do a background check prior to signing any agency agreement or distribution agreement with these companies. Make sure they are reliable. Make sure the services that they say they can do are actually realistic and real. The third option, and I will be going into this in more detail, is outsourcing your sales office. Many service providers now in China are offering trade solutions whereby companies can utilize their trading functions, their logistics functions, and even their warehousing functions in order to start selling on the Chinese market. Now, what this means is that actually you're entering the market by using a provider who handles all the paperwork, who will follow up on the logistics side of the importation process, would handle customs clearance, and handle all VAT issues associated with the transaction. In this way, it is a reliable as well as an effective solution because all the staff that can be hired to work solely for your entity. So in theory, this service provider would be able to legally employ your sales staff that you would interview, that you would choose, and they would sit in their office and handle all sales functions, developing the entire network required to achieve a successful sales solution. I will be going this into further detail because Clayco does offer such a similar solution. Now, when importing into China, it is important to realize that government-issued certification may be needed depending on the product. China requires various approval and registration processes which all take time. These procedures are carried out usually by the state authorities. Foreign inspection agencies are permitted to perform some of the tasks, such as production site inspection, but others are handled by the Chinese authorities. Now here, one of the most important is if you are selling on the Chinese market via a website platform, you do need to have an ICP license, which allows for e-commerce activities. In order to apply for this license, you would need to have a domain name registered in China. And naturally, the downside to this is that in order to have a domain name in China with, for example, a .cn at the end, you do need to have a registered Chinese entity purchasing this domain name. The other most popular certificate which is required is the CCC Certification. I will be going into more detail a little bit later because this is actually a certificate that most products nowadays require when importing from overseas. Others are medical product certifications, boiler, pressure vessels, safety equipment. In addition, any hazardous substances for electrical, electronic products, in addition to chemical products, that can't be forgotten. If you are in the telecommunications and radio industry, this also requires certification. Used machinery does require certification, and the downside to this is that the Chinese authorities will place their own value on the used machinery. So they will inspect the equipment prior to releasing it from customs, and they will put their own value as to the worth of the machinery. So this could eventually be a downside to importing used machinery. And in addition, there are energy efficient products which also require certification. Now, there are agencies in China which can handle all of these certifications. It is advisable to get some advice from some foreign consulting companies, whether abroad or local, to just give you a second opinion on the procedures that are needed. Generally speaking, one of the standard requirements is that the state authorities will need to visit the factory overseas in order to make sure that the products are in compliance according to PRC regulations. As I mentioned, I will be looking more carefully into the CCC certification as well as the product list. CCC stands for China Compulsory Certificate, otherwise known as the 3 Cs, and there are 19 categories of products. All of these products in the catalog must pass the certifications and must not be sold or imported or used in any type of sales activities until they have really achieved the related certificate marks. Now, how do you apply for such a certification? Generally, there's an application submission, which is very standard, just requires forms to be filled in. Once this is filled in, there is a testing phase. Several product samples will need to be sent to China. Together with these product samples, blueprints and design drawings will also have to be submitted. The products will be tested. If there are any deficiencies or any problems, they will be sent back, providing also improvements on where the deficiencies lie, and the products will then be retested. Once the products are finally approved, there will be the factory examination and inspection. What this requires is that factory inspectors or factory auditors will be sent overseas to visit the factory. They will go through an audit procedure. All costs associated with the visit of the factory inspectors must be settled by the factory. So there is quite a high cost involved in handling all of these procedures. Now, there are certain waivers to needing this CCC certification. And the products qualified for this waiver are usually products that are used in scientific research or test purposes. They're used within production lines. They're products imported for repair, things like this, or commercial exhibitions, things where it's not sold on a wholesale basis or to the end consumer, but used throughout the process for either exhibitions, sampling, or within the production lines. On this slide, you can see the first 10 requirements. I've highlighted number 7, which is household and similar electrical appliances. I will be focusing on this on a later date so that you can see also the subcategories. From 11 to 19, these are also the additional items together with the number of subcategories that are involved. It is quite an extensive and broad list for the 3C certification. Here you can see is the household and similar electrical appliances list. This is category 7. What it ranges from is everything from refrigerators, air conditioners, heaters, vacuum cleaners, electric cooking ranges, general cooking appliances, anything really that is used in a house or in a kitchen that is electric. Now I would like something completely off track. Previously I was mentioning household appliances. Here I would like to just emphasize how to import food and beverage products because it's a completely different procedure. Now here, all food and beverage items do need to go through a quarantine check and an inspection check where samples are sent to Beijing to check all items and to make sure that all the ingredients are safe. Once this general check is proved, this is only a one-time situation, then the goods can be imported into China. Upon importation, there will be a commerce inspection, which includes the hygiene license, checking actually the container that enters. In addition to that, there will be other import and export, import and customs declarations that will also be required. One of the most important aspects is that prior to clearing customs, all products, each product unit will have to be labeled. All the labels on the food product items have to be written in Chinese, and the basic items inside are the name of the food, the ingredient table, the name and address of the importer, manufacturer, whether it's a packaged food, the expiry date of the product, etc. So standard items that normally you would see on a food package, but this time it's a Chinese written label with all the information inside. Now, of course, one aspect that many companies forget to analyze is who has liability when importing a product into China. Now, the product quality law sets out strict liability to a producer of a product. That means that a producer is strictly liable for damages caused by a defective product. So it's pretty much like anywhere else in the world. It's really the producer that has the liability. The law states that a manufacturer who proves any of the following circumstances may not be liable. And I say may because in China, everything requires approval from certain government heads. The producer did not put the product on the commercial market, so it could be that the distributor also has liability. The defect did not exist at the time the product was put on the market, and the defect was not perceptible when it was put on the market. Now, it is worth noting that a person that does not produce itself but allows a Chinese entity to use their name, trademark, or any other distinguishing marks may also be liable along with the actual manufacturer or seller. So that's also something that you have to keep in mind. Now, there are conflicting rules in the law, in the product quality law, which is normal because generally all laws in China are, in my eyes, gray versus black and white, that it is debatable whether the seller is only liable for damages due to his fault. Now, it is our understanding that sellers of defective products are not liable unless the seller fails to identify the producer or his fault is contributed to the defect. Now, joint liability is usually the most common thing in China, particularly if the producer is overseas and he's selling to a distributor in China. The producer and the seller have to assume joint liability for a defective product. The injured party can pursue a claim from either of them. According to the law also provides for compensatory mechanisms if either the seller or the producer pays compensation, but the other is actually responsible for the defect. Now, the possibilities of limitation of liability. Well, there is not money. The exclusion of product liability is really in an individual contract, but exclusion of liability for gross negligence and intent and in general for injury of a person is not possible. The limitation of the action, the limitation period for claims for defective products is 2 years from the date that the claim has been made. It is also important to note that there have been cases that have been ongoing for close to 10 years for problems that have occurred with defective products. Now, I won't go through all of these other items because it is actually quite extensive in terms of product liability. I think really the most important thing that most people face or are wondering in terms of liability is whether there will be any criminal liability. In general, if a producer or seller faces criminal liability, it just means that the goods were not produced to the standards related to China. This then obviously relates to having the certification done, having inspectors and factory auditors come to your factories overseas to inspect everything, and having that approval right from the beginning. Now, I wanted to focus on case studies that are related to sales programs and what could be beneficial for you. There are a variety of business models that can be used. Every business model has its pros and cons related to whether it suits and fits the company. The first case study is related to re-invoicing via our Hong Kong company. The advantages of Hong Kong are many. The first being that it is a jurisdiction whereby you can apply for profits tax exemption, which basically means that if you have no employees in China, you don't invoice other Hong Kong companies, and the goods don't flow via Hong Kong, meaning they're not transshipped in Hong Kong, that you can apply for 0% profits tax. The tax exemption application is quite a tedious process. It's not simple. The IRD, the Inland Revenue Department, does investigate the company thoroughly. We'll look at every transaction that runs through the company during that fiscal year to make sure that really all transactions did occur offshore. In this slide, what you can see is that the Hong Kong company is purchasing the products from the suppliers overseas and selling to the customers in China or in Asia. Now, the biggest advantage that Hong Kong has is that it can sell to its customers in China in RMB currency. You will find that when you start negotiating with companies in China, they will want to pay in RMB because the process to do currency exchange is tedious and is lengthy. Now, the advantage of the fact that you that you have your customers pay in RMB is the fact that the Hong Kong company will take on the currency exchange risk. But in addition to that, your customers in China, as well as in any other Asian currency, any other Asian country, do not have the excuse to make late payments. Generally, the culture in Asia, as well as in China in particular, is that the payment terms are not followed through and there are always late payments. In China, the general excuse is I have to go make my foreign currency exchange and I need approval from the State Administration of Foreign Exchange. If the payment is done in RMB, this whole step is no longer there. So it is an advantage when starting your business in China. In addition to that, when you establish your company in China, there is no investment capital. You only have to pay $1 Hong Kong to set up the entity. And then a loan can be brought in to initiate the business. In China, if you want to set up a company, there is a much greater investment, and I will go into this in more detail in another case study. So Hong Kong companies, this business model, I highly recommend for companies that are maybe already have 1 or 2 customers in China. The customers are willing to handle the import clearances, the customs duty, and all of these steps, but they just want to pay in RMB, and they're happy to do it with a Hong Kong company. In addition to that, a Hong Kong company, you can handle everything virtually, which is a big advantage as well. And you can develop your team for the China business or Asian business in your parent company at home. The next option is adding a representative office into the equation. Now, if you do need and want to build a sales team in China, then actually you do need to have a registered entity in China to employ them. A Hong Kong company cannot employ legally mainland Chinese staff who are based in China. It's actually against the law. You do need to have an entity in China to employ them legally. Now, the loophole around this, obviously, is that you can have freelance agreements or sales agreements, sales agency agreements between the Hong Kong company and your sales staff in China. But this is a very, very gray area. And if your sales staff in China does denounce you to the authorities, potentially it could mean that you are blacklisted and you cannot make any types of investments in China any longer. So please, if you do hire staff in China, make sure everything is legal, make sure they're employed properly, they're paid properly, their social insurance is covered. And one of the simplest ways of doing it is via a representative office. Nowadays, the representative office is not the most tax efficient method, but it is still a simple structure to uphold. Within this structure, the Hong Kong company still handles all the trade transactions and all the payments, but you just have your sales network developing on the ground in China. The next option is saying, I won't have Hong Kong, and I will set up my own trading company in China. Now, the advantages to this is that your new China company will be handling all the importation, handling customs clearance, and potentially following up on all orders that are placed from the customers, handling all the logistics and the warehousing as well. Naturally, all the payments are done in renminbi, and your China company would be able to issue VAT invoices to your customers in China. I just want to emphasize on VAT invoices. When I go back to this case study, the one related to the Hong Kong company, Hong Kong companies cannot issue VAT invoices. And this is something to keep in mind because when you are handling your negotiations with your Chinese customers, they may require that they receive a VAT invoice. So a Hong Kong company cannot do that. But a China company can, and that is one of its advantages. Naturally, we always recommend to have a holding company via Hong Kong or via Singapore. The main reason behind this is to protect your parent company from any liability that may occur in China. Now, your China company would be handling the importation. It handles all the functions that are needed. In addition to that, it would probably be the entity that also handles all the licensing applications in order to import your products. So this is also something to keep in mind. Now, one of the, depending on what stage you are in your whole sales program, is that you initially start off with a trading company in Hong Kong. You handle your initial sales to both China and or Asia via this company in Hong Kong. If you want staff on the ground to handle your sales activities and you want to have people located in several places, rather than setting up a representative office, you may want to set up a limited company straight away. The reason being is that you can actually structure the operation more tax efficiently. In addition to that, you have a limited company that could potentially sell at any time to customers in China. This entity would be able to issue VAT invoices to customers in China. So here you have two options that you can actually offer to your customers in China. You can say to them, I will invoice you from my Hong Kong company in RMB, or I can invoice you from my China trading company. I'll handle all importation and I'll issue a VAT invoice at the end. So here you're provided with more flexibility in terms of offering something to your customers. Don't forget that Hong Kong can also cater other Asian countries. You can consider Hong Kong as your Asia regional hub, not only catering to China, but also other countries in the Asian market. And your limited company, your limited trading company in China can handle all the China sales activities and all the processing. Something to keep in mind, if you do hire staff in China, it is very difficult for them to cater to the Asian market because generally all Chinese individuals do need additional visas to travel to other Asian countries. If you do want to attack Asia, I would recommend that you hire a salesperson in Hong Kong who caters to that market. The next option, and this I am finding more and more with my customers, is that naturally they are producing in China as well. So not only will they have factories overseas, but they will also subcontract some of the manufacturing to China. As a result, they may want to actually sell the products that they produce in China to customers in China. The only way to do this is by having a trading entity in China that buys from the suppliers and sells to the customers. You cannot have a trading company in Hong Kong do this business model because you would need to export the goods and re-import them into China, and this just adds additional cost. So for this domestic sales program, where you produce in China and sell in China, the only solution is really by having your own China trading company. As I had mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, one of the outsourcing solutions that might be interesting for many people that are looking to come onto the Chinese market but haven't entered yet is having an outsourced sales office. And in order to explain what this actually means, I will refer to how Clayco Group offers this type of service. What it basically means is that we would assist you with all your marketing activities. What that includes is translating your website information as well as your marketing material into the Chinese language, perhaps even suggesting to join certain trade shows in China that are specific to your product categories and your product groups. We would handle all of the setup of the booths, as well as also attending the trade fair to start sales processes. We can assist with offering a concept called the Instant Office Solution. What this means is you could hire your sales team who would sit in our office and conduct sales for you. The advantage of this is that if you don't want to hire an expatriate to supervise these people locally, you could have Clayco's management team supervise them and make sure they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is going out there and making sales, having meetings. In addition to that, samples can be kept in the office, which then can be provided to the customers. If the samples are relatively large, then these would have to be warehoused by a logistics provider. This is one of our disadvantages, I have to admit, is that Clayco Group does not have its own warehousing facilities in China, so all the logistics and warehousing functions would still need to be outsourced to a logistics provider, but Clayco can handle the coordination. We can handle all the requirements associated with import clearances, as well as warehousing, domestic trucking if required, and of course the invoicing to the customers. This is a typical workflow that we use in order to do this outsourced sales office. You have to imagine that all we are doing is the physical paperwork. You've hired the staff, they're employed by Clayco, they're sitting in our office, and they're dealing with sales transactions, and utilizing our trading entity to handle this. What we've found by offering this solution is that many of our clients have initiated perhaps 6 months to 1 year's worth of transactions. They found that over this period of time the transactions increased, and they realized the Chinese market is of interest for them, and there is an actual market for their products. Once this realization has hit them, the clients will generally at that point want to become independent. And by independent, it means they will set up their own trading entity, or perhaps even their own factory to handle assembly work, whereby they can then sell directly to their customers as they want. So in general, this solution is usually just a temporary one. It's a temporary one whereby clients can test the market until they realize that either there is no market for their products, or there definitely is one and they're ready now to set up their own entity. The advantage with Clayco is that we are happy to provide the staff that were originally employed by Clayco. They can be automatically transferred to the new entity once it's established. If there's any inventory that's kept by Clayco, this can also then be sold to the new entity that has already been established. So it's a very simple procedure, it's a very efficient procedure, and the biggest advantage is that the customer has focused on his sales activities without investing so much into the project. Now that is the end of our presentation. I hope I've been able to clarify what options people have for their sales programs into China. If you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. We would be happy to assist you. Our contact details are here. You can reach me in Shanghai, or you can reach Sven, who is based in our Hong Kong office. You can also email me at christina.kohler@clayco.com. If you would like to hear more about this presentation, I will be offering it again next week. The time of the presentation will be at 8 a.m. Asian time. If you would like to register for it, you can do so on our website at the events section. So again, I hope you enjoyed our presentation, and if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. I wish you all a pleasant evening and look forward to seeing you again at our future webinars. Thank you.